So we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the new episode of the System B2B Marketing live chats. Today with my guest, with Karl, who is also another speaker at B2B Marketers and Founders Conference that will hold in Valencia. We'll speak about influencing B2B decision making. Karl also is Slackdog founder, but I will give him a mic to introduce himself, so he'll be able to do it much better than me. So, like I mentioned, we'll speak today about how to penetrate into enterprise companies, what a Slackdog's lead generation process looks like, how to engage with several decision makers, how to figure out actually what is the decision-making process in your target account is, how to influence this decision-making process, and many other questions. So feel free just to drop all your questions in the comment section, and we'll with pleasure answer them during the conversation. So, Karl, thanks a lot for joining me today.
Hello. Nice to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Actually, besides my very short introduction, I always ask my guests to introduce themselves, as they can do it much better than me. So let's start with a very easy question: who you are and what you do.
Andre, I think actually that is maybe the hardest question to answer. I was hoping for that I get from you a sound bite that I can reuse over and over again. Karl is, because I don't have an answer to that. But I think maybe what makes most sense is to look at my career path, right? I think that gives a bit of an introduction who I am, what I do, and what I think. So shall we start with that maybe?
Definitely, but that's actually the question. What I do at Slackdog, and just share with our listeners.
Okay, I basically grew up in a tiny village, like not so tiny. It's a rather big village, tiny city in the Black Forest. And right after I finished school, I went on to be a salesman, and a salesman really in the sense of selling goods, back then mobile phones, like the dumb phones, not the smart ones, to persons directly, right? And so there I learned a lot about how to do that, and I think that is maybe the base of everything what I'm doing right now. I was the youngest sales manager to be allowed to create workshops, right? Like internally for schooling purposes. So that was one big achievement. And basically after that, because I realized, hey, there's a thing, and the thing is called the internet, and it will kind of destroy your salesman business. I went to study, and I studied, nowadays you would call it behavioral economics. It's basically the bridge between psychology and economics. And after that, I made some contributions, like some scientific ones, and was then hired as a consultant. And in the role as a consultant, I was working, let's say, 25 to 30 companies, and mostly in the sphere of market penetration, pricing, profiling, and that kind of thing, right? Later, I moved then on to go a bit in the background of consulting, creating models on how to consult. So, and at some point I was like, okay, I don't want to wear a suit every day. I kind of feel I'm seeing repeating patterns, what companies make wrong. And I'm not really in a position to fix that. I need an own company. And so I teamed up with some amazing people, and we created Slackdogs. And yeah, so that's in a nutshell my story. Slackdogs is a product studio. So that means basically we offer everything you need to generate out of a vision or an idea, an innovative product. So from consulting, design, implementation, aftercare, basically the whole process. And we've done that with a lot of amazing people, great startups, great enterprises, and I think we are very good in creating products that people love to use, creating them in a process that is kind of enjoyable for the client and for us, while creating a very unique company culture to be able to last, let's say, 5 or 10 or ideally 1,000 decades, right?
Yep, that's a great story. That's a great story. Besides like dogs, and here's here you can see in action a famous German mentality to think about many steps forward, many steps for a business which will last for many years. That's great. That's great. Actually, what I mentioned in the podcast intro, you have acquired such monsters as Mercedes Benz, as Accenture, as Mimi, as Google Launchpad, as a customers. So for many companies, it's just a dream clients. Everybody don't know a company, or let's say let niche down it to the marketing agencies, to the marketing area, who actually doesn't think about such customers. So that the enterprise lead generation process is very sophisticated, but you have figured out the solution. So share with us how actually your lead generation process looks like, and what your secrets to penetrate into such clients.
Well, that's a tough one. Maybe let me start by saying we don't exclusively work with big clients, right? We basically trying to have a good mix in our portfolio between, let's say, startups, like tiny startups, where we love the idea, we kind of believe in the founders, and we want to go with them, right? And then in contrast to that, working on these, let's say, bigger innovation topics with these huge accounts, right? So I might disappoint you a bit here, I believe, but roughly 80% of the leads we're getting or the jobs we're closing are recommendations. So we are lucky in the position that in our niche in which we are, and in our ecosystem, people know that we're good. So basically, the first thing I can tell you, what you definitely need to do is build up reputation. There is nothing that works better than that. You need to deliver A-class products. You need to go the extra miles. You need to be able to carry, let's say, a huge big client on your shoulders, which means a lot of iteration rounds, which means a lot of people involved, which means sometimes very, very long decision cycles. And that is not easy, and not many can do it well. So I think that's one of our edges. So, yeah, please.
Awesome. I just was wondering, so besides besides the reputation, besides the word of mouth, even in these cases when somebody introduce your companies to another corporation, you still should be involved into tender. Like it's the most common way how enterprise companies sign contracts with contractors, or at least you'll be as usually you are introduced to one decision maker, but at enterprise companies have several decision makers. So the question is, what do you do? How you can avoid tenders, or at least if there will be a tender, what can you do to outstand your company, I mean Slackdog, amongst your competitors?
Man, these are if I counted correctly, these are 3 really, really heavy questions, right? So we have basically 1. What can you do to avoid tenders? We have 2. If you are in a tender, how can you stand out, right? And 3, how to deal with multiple decision-making things. Okay,
I'll start with the first.
Okay, that's heavy. Let me start maybe by first stating that you have to be on your toes all the time, because there is no golden key in unlocking those accounts. It's things change constantly. For example, 3 things that often change are your point of entry, right? Or basically, I always call it our first ambassador in a company. Can be that he moves his job. Can be that he suddenly works in a different department, right? Often changes price sensitivity, right? For example, we started an account and we had a job, and we had the feeling, hey, these guys are really looking after quality. So we tuned everything we've done to quality, and later we realized because of some bigger shift in strategy, which often happens in bigger companies, suddenly they are rather price sensitive than quality sensitive. And the last thing I've seen changing a lot, and what keeps us on our toes, is we often enter tenders, or let's say negotiation processes, because we're trying to avoid tenders, by argumenting with a technological edge. We're normally argumenting that we are technologically superior to most of the things you would find otherwise, because we have an exceptional good team, which operates basically in state-of-the-art technology. But this can change rapidly. Like, you work half a year on a project and suddenly there's technology out there you wouldn't have even known before, right? So this may be as the first frame where you have to be careful, and maybe as an advice, you have to monitor the situation or the relationship between you and your account constantly, right? Because the thing that worked, let's say, half a year ago doesn't have to work later. There is no magic code you type in, like a super cheat code and everything works. You basically have to adjust to the needs of the account constantly. So let me also go a bit into very short how to engage with people, because I believe that is a bit what this is all about in the end, like to what it boils down.
Definitely.
And there I kind of believe that this is where Jonas, my co-founder, and I have a personal edge, because we're both in that field for quite some time. It's this, we believe that the last years were a lot about optimization, about technocracy, about efficiency, about the rationality of things. But at some point, I feel it swinging back. And I feel it swinging back towards what I would call an old school type of salesmanship, right? That starts with knowing your account, knowing the name of the kids, knowing the birthday, sending a card, calling, asking for advice. For example, you know that let me assume that you like motorcycles, right? And I want to buy one, which I actually want to. So if anyone has a tip, I would really appreciate it. But I would call you, even if you're an account, like a deal I'm trying to close, I would call you, hey, Andre, I have this, like here, I got an offer for a motorbike. I know you know a lot about it. What do you think? So I would try to engage with you on many different levels. And I would try, don't get me wrong, it's not about this, like, used car dealership type of salesman. That should actually die. And it died because of the internet, because of the transparency it delivered. But it's about this salesman that takes pride in his product and pride in his solution and cares about that people use it right and that it enriches their life. And this attitude goes a very long way. So that may be as a frame around it, right? like what I think is kind of like the backbone of all of that. You need to be able to sell face to face to a person with the love of your product. If you can't do that, you will never ever be able to scale it. So, right? Let me quickly go to the third point. Tenders.
I'm just give me a second. I was, what you answered just remind me a famous book by Harvey Mackay called How to Swim with the Sharks Without Being Eaten Alive. And and this famous book, I know it's not very popular amongst modern marketers, but we are as old school guys. It was a very popular book. So I was really surprised when Harvey described his, let's say, enrichment process, let's call it this way, where he shared his MyK66 survey. So for every salespeople, even nowadays, marketer can do just a part of the job, but at that time it was mandatory for salespeople to know 66 points about their target accounts, about their customers, all the stuff that you mentioned. So even for what football team you support, or
exactly.
Or what kind of cognac do you drink, or whiskey, etc., etc. So you should be like a best friend for your target account, and it's just one of the mandatory things to stay with such companies. And as I came also from FMCG market, we had to deal with biggest supermarket chains, the same enterprise companies, where sometimes contracts can be signed for 5 years. I mean, the sales cycle can 5 years. So it's just, if you want at least sign this contract, you should always be in close touch with your with core people from, let's divide them into segments: decision makers and people who influence the decision maker.
That is an interesting point you're making with the distinction, like because actually when we're looking into, let's say, the science behind group decisions, what you will see is that there isn't much. Like we have a whole lot about the decision making of individuals, right? We have a whole lot about why are people addicted, why do they gamble, why do they make wrong decisions, right? Often you can find tons, but you won't find that much on how are actually the inner workings of a mechanism of a decision making unit, right? Like how does that work? So you asked me, what would be a good starting point, right? If you have a new account, and what would you do? What I normally do is I'm kind of looking at the every decision-making process basically has to have at least 7 roles. These 7 roles can be divided on 3 people. They can be divided on 2 people. If it's a really tiny company, sometimes all of that is condensed into 1 person. But let's say in our bigger accounts, we're dealing with, let's say, minimum 4 up to 50, right? And these roles are somehow always distributed. And the roles are, you have the users. So these are actually the ones that will then use your service or product. You have the influencers. The influencers are those who are defining like in a sense, the preconditions for the buying decisions. You have the buyers. These are the normal guys you see when you're facing, right? These are the ones you're negotiating with. You have the initiators, who are the ones that suffered the most under the problem you're trying to solve and initiated basically the outreach to find a solution. These are very important because these guys are easiest to turn into your ambassadors, right? If you get them on your side, the one that initially yelled, "Oh man, something is going wrong here, we need to make it better," these guys normally have a lot of attention in the process, right? In this negotiation internal. Then you have the deciders, which is normally the guy or the girl at the top. Careful here, people tend to overestimate the importance of that, because we tend to overestimate how much they actually decide. They normally, in bigger companies, only give a signature. Important is to find the level below it, and because this is the level that prepares the decision for them, and they basically reduce a complex decision for the decider to a choice, right? And the last 2 are gatekeepers and finance, right? Finance is clear, it's the budget restrictions, and the gatekeepers can be something like a receptionist, right? So someone who moderates this process of who gets in, who gets out, who talks to whom, like the organizing force, actually. So, and starting very consciously by identifying these 7 functions in the people involved, gives you a huge edge, because what you want to do is you want to understand the motivation of everyone involved, ideally, right? Like you would love to see, hey, he does that because of that, or I can influence him if I better my offer in that sphere, right? He loves A, this guy loves B, so who is more important? Where do I need to focus? And by mapping them onto basically these 7 roles, you already understand, and it's a continuous process, but you already understand the base motivation of most of them. And that is a good head start, right? There is basically, if you do this, you're one step into the game, because honestly, it's nothing else but a game.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Awesome point on this. And and just realized what we missed. In case if we have several decision makers, and if we have also gatekeepers, and if we have several people who influence the decision making process, from your experience, whom you should reach out firstly?
Well, that is hard, because truth to be told, Andre, most of the time, and I think you know it, we have to take what we get, right? Like especially in the bigger games, you are normally assigned to someone, or someone is like the predefined gatekeeper, and you're channeled there. So what I learned is that, and that goes back really a long time, and it's again very much basic penetration strategy, and that is, there are 3 ways, like 3 classical ways how to do it, or how to approach it, and they are bottom up, top down, and middle in. And if you want to, I can go quickly through all 3 of them.
Definitely, yeah? Let's discuss them.
Like, it's a bit like the bottom up approach is pretty straightforward. It's normally the one that is pre-designed by the corporation you're working with, and it's like you're getting, as I said, you're getting assigned to someone who pre-sorts, who kind of checks, who has like a rough idea of what this is about, and then you're passing on the stages. That is bottom up. Top down is the exact opposite. That is actually where you are more active, because you're trying to jump as high into this value chain and then being delegated downwards, because what that does is it already gives you a massive internal authority boost. Imagine that you are succeeding in going to both with the CEO, right? And or getting on the phone with him, or he responds to your email, and he then delegates you further down to someone who really is like an expert, or he puts you like from top into that process. That already implies for everyone else involved in that process that okay, this guy was, or this product or the service was pre-vetted by our highest authority. And that gives you already like 2-3 steps ahead of everyone that comes bottom up. So top down is definitely, at least for complex accounts, definitely preferable to bottom up, I believe. But now the fun part is, and I would love to hear your thoughts about it, because I absolutely believe that middle in is actually on average, not in every game, but on average, the superior strategy. And middle in is that you're trying to find or to identify, and that is a complex thing how to do that, but trying to identify who is the knowledge keeper for that specific problem in the company. And that is normal, that's kind of middle management, that's somewhere there, right? It's never the CEO. Like a specific problem, it's never CEO matters. CEOs are about big picture. They're about resource allocation. They're not about problems we are solving with our products normally. And then you're trying to get in over that edge, because it does 2 things. One, because of the nature of because the knowledge is bundled there, they have a lot of the 7 roles bundled on that level, right? Like most of the roles, like over 50% you will find there. And second, and that is something that I think I mentioned already, but let's think about it. Think about a state. A state is an immensely complex construct, right? And you have these ministries, like you have the Ministry of Interior, Defense, whatnot. And then you have the heads of those, the ministers. But did you realize that they sometimes switch? Like you know, the Ministry of Finance is suddenly the Ministry of Defense, like the Minister of Defense? That happened, right? So what that tells us is that the head can't have all the knowledge. Like you can't tell me that the Ministry of Finance and the Minister of Defense, when they switch in 6 months, that they know everything about defense or finance suddenly, right? And the reason why it still works is because they're rather having a representative function. And that do many CEOs or like higher ups have that as well. And below them is it's called technocracy. These are the guys who work there for 20 years, 30 years, who know all the ins and outs. And these guys actually are the level where decisions are made, because these guys decide what goes through actually to be a choice for the decision maker. So and that's why I believe, and I would love to hear your thoughts on that, that targeting on that level, like basically middle in and identifying the clear knowledge there, is much more sensible and resource friendly than trying to go top down.
Yep, that's awesome. I assume you just nailed the topic.
Hopefully, yeah. But but you have to be maybe one tip to that. Like, no matter which way you take, what you should always do is be in very close contact with your first ambassador or your key contact, like the first one, even though it might be someone that is not so important, but you have to give him the valuation for being your first fan, right? You have to update him. You have to show the appreciation. You have to tell him, hey, the process goes really smooth, because what you're trying to do in these companies is you're trying to create a fan base, essentially, right? You want people to wear your shirts and root for you to get the job. The more the merrier, the more the better.
Exactly. And actually, what is the right way? What is the right way to figure out the decision-making process? Because it's just one of the most important parts during the negotiation, during all the negotiation process. In case if you'll be able to evaluate, to figure out this process, you can prepare the correct content. You can prepare the, let's say, a content for the bottom of the panel activities. You can prepare right case studies, right ROI calculators, comparison reports, etc.
Yeah.
So what's your approach to figuring out this decision-making process?
That's again a very complex question, because it's so individual from company to company. It's like, I always compare that to these real-time strategy games like Command and Conquer or Warcraft or Starcraft. Yeah, where you're getting like you're getting like a starting base, and all around you is this fog of war, like where you have to send your little troops in to kind of uncover it. And this is exactly that. You have to, the first thing you're doing is you have to be very precise and clear what your starting point is, because it's often something else than you think it is. And they're not always playing very openly about it. Like sometimes you think you are in the heart of the decision-making process, because everybody wants to display himself as the decision maker, but you're actually not. You're like somewhere on the edges. So first thing, and there comes personal quality in, and you have to have two things really well. You have to be an amazing listener, and you have to be able to listen like in between the tones and in between the lines. And you have to be very smart in asking questions. And so this is the first thing, right? You're meeting someone, you need to locate him in the net. You need to find out, does he report somewhere, or Is he the one that will relay me to someone else, or what is his function, right? And then you're mapping on these functions, and from there on, you're basically, like you said, you're collecting just tons of information. How do people relate to each other? If I drop an information here, does it show up somewhere else, for example? And truth to be told, at the moment, I believe that this, let's say, approach is very much something great salespeople, marketeers do, because they do it by nature, like they do it by instinct. I haven't seen anyone really breaking that down into like a guide or into, hey, this is the way how to map these decision-making processes. Haven't seen it, and that's exactly why I chose the topic I chose for Valencia, for the conference. Because until then, I want to provide exactly that. Like I want to, that should be the takeaway for the guys listening into Valencia. Should be a step-by-step guide on how to map out decision-making processes. So I'm currently talking to the brightest salespeople I know, and marketeers. You're also on that list, by the way, to figure out their tactics and to kind of try to find the common ground, right? Like so yeah, stay tuned. I don't have a perfectly fine answer for that, but I can tell you it's definitely about mapping those roles. That is scientifically proven. It's about listening. It's about the right questions. And it's about, like, let's say, natural curiosity to always push further and not initially believing what you've been told.
Definitely. And what do you do in cases if one of the decision makers is ready to start the business and another one who also wasn't involved in the negotiation process held the project on pause? For example, chief marketing officer is ready to start, he transferred the project to finance, and CFO has paused the project. What are your ideas?
Well, like, first of all, I'm getting mad, you know, like I'm getting sad and I'm questioning my life choices. But no, it's mostly about, like, exactly that shouldn't happen. That's what I want to say. The first thing you need to realize in these situations is that they happen, right? Like it's just like that is a rule. Like you can't have every fight you're taking won't go smooth. No chance for that. But what I like to do is two things. One, I would love to remind everybody around me or who's working on that we can only influence what is under our control and what we understand, right? It's actually coming, if I'm not entirely wrong, coming a bit from the Stoic philosophy to say you shouldn't bother with stuff that you can't influence, right? You should focus on what you can influence, and finding out what you can and can't influence is a really, really big step. And my experience tells me that the stuff you can influence is already so much that you really shouldn't bother with stuff you can't influence. So first thing, don't get mad. It happens. So let's talk about when a project is paused. I think there are two normally I see two possibilities. One, and you can judge which one of those you're hitting based on whether it surprised you or not. So A, it surprised you. If it surprised you, you can quite clearly say that your mapping is off. You made a mistake in your realm of what you can control. If you can't control it, you can't control it, right? So we're always trying to look at what could we have done differently. Doesn't necessarily need to be the exact right thing, but it helps us getting better at least. So one, if you are surprised by the stalling, by the pause, it's your mapping. That means, mapping, is you didn't understand the process well enough in the time you had to foresee that you need to be able to influence someone else as well, right? So that is, your mapping is somewhere faulty. What you need to do in that case is you basically you have to treat it like a new game. You basically, again, we're going computer games. You're basically hitting escape, hitting escape, quit the game, start new game. But now you already know a bit more of the map, right? You're loading the same map, and you already have one ally. Your initial ambassador, right? The one you convinced is already there. And so what I would do is I would just treat it as a completely new game. Careful, here you have to really decide whether it's worth playing one more round. It could be that it's not. It could be that the hurdles you are facing are just too high, or that there is some ego in play. Like he doesn't want it because someone he doesn't like proposed it. That happens. And so in this case, again, listen, ask, listen closely, try to get very close to the person that blocked it and find out their motivation, right? You clearly didn't know enough about that person. So that is the mapping problem. The second thing, if you're not surprised, if you rather like had already this hunch and you could feel that it's coming, it's not your mapping normally, it's your tailoring. That is, if you knew that you need to convince him, or if it doesn't surprise you that he's a factor in this game, what is wrong is how you put your stuff together, because obviously it wasn't good enough to convince that person, right?
The live services issue might happen, so
Don't worry.
It just reload my screen for some reasons, but anyway, we are live, so we can continue.
Perfect. So as I said, the second thing is tailoring, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it's about if you knew that this guy was a factor in the process, but you couldn't convince him, it's your service or product that is not good enough. It's not like, I see it like, imagine you're trying to make a custom suit, like a tuxedo, right? And you need to have your measurements right. You need to know whether the left arm is longer than the right arm. You need to know whether one leg is longer, right? Like, and if you're hitting that and you knew it can come, you obviously took the measurements wrong. So to fix that, what you can do is, you need to get the right measures. So you need to again figure out where is the roadblock, clear, and adjust your proposal. So mapping or tailoring is normally, but it's very specific. So that is normally where people then call me or us and ask for advice, because they are already so much into that game, and it's normally a very long process, that they're losing a bit the ability to maneuver with open eyes, like you're narrowing down and you're kind of getting blind. So getting a second set of eyes is extremely helpful if something is paused, because I normally take my co-founder or former colleagues and ask them, right? I'm basically retelling the story of how it happened, and then trying to thinking while talking, figuring out why potentially there could have been something. So get a second set of eyes is another tip. And then maybe, Andre, the last thing I would say is, it can be also that the ball drops completely, right? Like you're just dead, hit down, cold fish in the water, floating up. What I often see as a mistake being made is that people believe this is actually the end of the game. It's not. If you're dead, it just means you're now in a different phase, and the phase is called aftercare and generating insights, because you need to know why you died, right? Like you need to know why you're dead, because there will be another game, and there will be another game with similar players, and there will be another game, maybe not for the exact same specification, but in big companies, there will be another game like every 3 months, maybe, where you can participate. And if you're really smart, you already design an aftercare and insight generation process, right? That triggers the moment you're there. And it's reaching out to the people, asking for reasons, being still very kind, very forthcoming, still remembering the names of the babies and the birthdates and all of that, because you will generate immensely valuable insights how the game is played there once you're out of the game. Because once you're out of the game, people will actually often talk very openly with you, right? Sometimes they feel bad for you and they're like, yeah, you know, it happened because, and Jenny from accounting, she, like stuff like that. And so you definitely get a lot of more insights there. And I would use it as a preparation for a next round.
That's awesome. And you know, in the end of our conversation, I want to discuss the topic. What are the techniques that can be used to influence the decision-making process in case if you aren't able to talk with the decision maker? And it's a very, very common issue to many companies. They are speaking to non-decision makers, to people who just can bring your proposal, your project to decision maker, but then, like you mentioned, it just lost in the fog of war. So you don't know what's happening to this proposal, you don't know the destiny of this proposal, and you just in many cases you are sitting like with fingers crossed, waiting for approval. So what are some techniques that you can use to reach the decision maker?
Like first of all, I would say in 70% of all cases, you just chose or were assigned the wrong entry, because that shouldn't happen, right? Like the moment you are basically on a pile of paper, buried under other papers, which say nearly exactly the same what you're saying, you already have the game rigged against you. So your whole thing, that is again something like a lot of people, as I said, when they're dead, think the game ends, but a lot of people also don't realize when the game actually starts, because the game starts earlier than they think. So you already, in preparation for a game, you already need to think about how to not end up in specifically this situation. So there's not much I can give as a general advice here, because it's very, very specific to the account again. But let's maybe distinguish two situations. One is a tender situation, and one is, let's say, like such a middle in or a bottom up or top down type of thing, right? Like where you're actually approaching it and trying to make the way. So tender, try to avoid it. Like tender is horrible for us as suppliers. I get it from the demand side. Like I understand why we're building bridges and tunnels and libraries and whatnot with tenders. But for us as suppliers, it's basically pressing us into a rat race. And I like to compare tenders to casinos, because because it's actually that when you think about it, right? It's the house always wins, right? Sometimes one or two players also win, and we generate like a win-win situation over the amount of games. Like the house always wins, but most of the players lose. You will lose the time for preparation. You will lose nerves. You will lose sleep. You will, all of that, money, right? So tenders are to be avoided, in my opinion. Not always possible. So if you're going into a tender, I would advise you to behave like you would behave in a casino. So it's dress properly, right? Like look good, dress to impress. Don't get drunk, which in our context means don't overpromise, because the moment, like, what I mean is in a casino you're drinking and suddenly you're throwing your chips around. In a tender situation, it's quite similar, because this pressure of a tender often leads to someone over-promising, And that is really bad because you're overpromising. They maybe take you based on that promise, so you have the short gain, but you're losing a lot of reputation and money, and maybe you're getting even fined, you know, like because of the agreement, if you can't hold the overpromised stuff. So I saw a lot of people having a hard time because of that. So dress to impress, don't get drunk. And last but not least, don't think that the lady or the guy dealing you the cards is your friend. He is not. He plays for the house in the end, right? So these are my tender rules, how I approach tenders. I kind of approach it like gambling. So, so that is the one thing, the tender side. And if you have this not tender side, where you actually generated and move and are kind of having your feet in for one reason or another, it's again, you have to, first thing, understand the game and its surroundings. So that's the whole mapping thing we were talking about, right? You have to understand the needs and the players. So that's the whole asking, listening, verifying, and then based on your conclusions, tailoring your service or product. And you have to be on your feet to map changes. And that is interesting because mapping changes is what you normally can't do from the outside. You have no chance. Like, you just can't know if some priorities change. You can't know if the budget suddenly change. If they don't tell you, you will never know. But often it happens that no one thinks about telling you that they now have maybe less budget. And you're dropping out of the pile of papers just because your offer is too expensive now, right? But you would totally willing to either make it cheaper or to adjust it to reflect a better value for price or something like that. So how do you do that? And this is, again, circling back to what I said in the beginning. You really, really need to focus on your initial contact, the ambassador, your fan club, because if you have that, you have a good source normally of reliable information. And the faster that reaches you, the faster you can react, and the better are your chances.
Yep. Thanks a lot for this answer. And for our listeners, I just want to mention once more that this conversation was devoted to Karl's presentation during our B2B Marketers and Founders Conference in Valencia. That will be hosted 3rd of November in Spain, in Valencia, in Spain. So I just dropped a link with the website of our conference, so you can check the agenda and buy tickets and join us. So I assume you'll enjoy the agenda and what we have prepared for the conference. So you also will be able to discuss all the B2B marketing questions, issues with me, with Karl, and with other speakers. So feel free to stay with us on conference after party. We'll be glad to answer all your questions. And as for today, it was brilliant conversation with a man who actually works with for so many years works with enterprise companies from my point of view, very conservative market, whom many companies want to reach out, whom many companies want to cover, but in many cases, their let's say, efforts aren't so successful as Karl with his company actually have. So if you'll have any questions about this topic or about the conference, drop them in the comment section, or feel free to reach me out or send Karl also a private message. We'll be glad to answer all the questions. Thanks a lot for joining me today, man, and I hope we'll have another great conversation in Valencia. Take care and see you.
Take care. Very much looking forward. Bye-bye.